Before we begin, just know this. Some games are only fun until the fifth player shows up, even though only 4 of you walked into the room. Hey there, Cutie and Boo, and welcome back to my channel for another cozy bedtime story. Have you heard of something called the Four Corners game? It's a summoning game, something like Bloody Mary, or as we saw in a previous video, Pinky Pinky. Some people might remember the more innocent game from school, where kids run between the 4 numbered corners in their classroom, hoping the one they're standing in isn't called by the person who chooses the numbers and makes eliminations. If their corner number is called, they are out, eliminated, and the game continues until there is just one winner. The last kid standing. So keep that in mind for the story today. The last kid standing. The alternative, creepier Four Corners game is apparently one of the most dangerous games you can play. Apparently it started in Korea, but some people say it might be from other East Asian countries. One account says it originated in the Japanese mountains, where 5 mountaineers sat out together. And when one of them died from exposure, the surviving 4 brought the body to a cabin and tried to revive it, calling the soul back with this ritual. So the whole point of the game is to call forward spirits and entities from where they lurk in high and dark places. The theory is that they are always there right next to us, watching, waiting, sometimes just to observe us, or sometimes to prey on humans or their energy, and in some cases, as we see, maybe even because they're trapped in those places. So before I get into it, this is your invitation to set the mood. If you're in a room where a game like Four Corners could be played, like a room with 4 corners, which should be most rooms, either you want to turn the lights down to mimic the gameplay, or turn them up if you think this might freak you out. I won't dare you to do this in the dark. It's your choice. Because as we will see, some games are not to be toyed with. Now let's get into it. So first things first, how does the game work? There are a few different versions, so I'll give one here, and please feel free to add any variations in the comments. To play the Four Corners game, you need 4 players together in an empty or almost empty room with 4 corners. So this room shouldn't be too messy or stuffed with furniture. A basement is ideal, for example. That also means no other people, no pets. Some people say even insects can upset the energy of the game. You need a light source, like a camping lamp, but the main light will also work. But it should be a bright light, not just a phone or something enough to light the room. All other lights in the building should be turned off. Then before you enter the room, you should agree some things up front. Who the leader or speaker is, a nonverbal signal to let other players know you are still in the room after the game starts. And finally, what the emergency protocol is if something goes wrong or something goes missing. This can be a knock or clapping, or player 1 knocks once, player 2 knocks twice, and so on. When you enter the room, the door should be closed and the light turned off immediately. Then each player says their name 3 times before moving to their corner. They stand facing the wall with their backs to the room. This is so the spirit has a chance to observe you and make their way into the area without being observed, especially if they have something nastier planned. Standing in their own corner, the speaker then counts to 3. 1, 2, and on 3, players begin to walk slowly, and this is super hard if you're scared, clockwise to the next corner. There you stand facing the wall again. After everybody has moved to their new corner, you begin your pre-agreed signal to show that everybody is there. You cannot speak. And this is where things get weird because sometimes this is where players can disappear. When you begin to do your signals, some players simply aren't there anymore. Their signal never comes. They vanished. Sometimes one by one, players might clap once for player 1, twice for 2, 3 times for 3, 4 times for 4, and then, expecting that to be that, 5 claps will happen. Yeah, that's right. A 5th entity is now there in the room, and it looks like it wants to play too. That is when it's time for the emergency protocol. You must retrace your steps counterclockwise and say your names backwards 3 times. Then the leader must turn on the light again. With hope, all players should be returned and the entity gone. If anything is amiss, unfortunately, you have to continue the game. It is vital at all stages that everything is done absolutely correctly. Otherwise, players risk being lost forever, losing their minds, being possessed, losing the power of speech, and even sudden unexplained deaths shortly following the game. You must never, ever speak to or engage with a ghost if it appears, and you must never speak out of turn. All 4 players must be back in the room, in your corners, and now facing the center of the room for the game to truly end. And even then, players have sometimes recorded being followed for weeks or even years after summoning something evil by playing 4 corners. In my research for this, and thanks to the viewer who suggested I look into it, there were stories of mimics stealing players' voices, strange scratches showing up on the walls, whispers in people's ears as they stood in the corners. Seriously, all kinds of creepy happenings. One story involved a player becoming totally nonverbal and stuck to their corner. They had to be dragged out of it and ended up spending time in psychiatric care. So, like a lot of these things, it's all fun and games until something goes wrong. And we look at one story of a game gone wrong. Now, even though it's thought this game originated in Korea or East Asia, this story is actually from Ghana. There were 4 school friends, super tight, who discovered this game on TikTok. They were huge K-pop fans, so the algorithm sometimes showed them other stuff connected to Korea. They discovered new dances, new foods, new music, movies, shows, and yeah, sometimes extra cultural things like the Four Corners game. Afia was the leader of the group. She was outspoken, smart, popular, and yeah, she could be a little bossy, but she always had the best ideas and the boldness to see them through. Her parents ran a farm not so far outside Accra, and it wasn't unusual for Afia and her friends to stay the weekend there where they could enjoy the fresh air and space. The farm had a few outhouses and barns, so there was always somewhere the girls could go to escape the prying eyes of Afia's parents. But even so, when the girls pulled their shoes on after dinner, laughing and slapping each other, excited to try out the game, Afia's father warned, "Nothing dangerous, darling." "No, Papa," Afia assured him, but with a wink to her friends, because Afia loved trouble. At school, they watched video after video about how to play the Four Corners game, in between classes, over lunch, riding the bus into the city, and then in the car out to the farm. By the time they'd eaten dinner and were ready to play, they could almost have a PhD on the ins and outs of how to play Four Corners. The only thing they had to do now was find a suitable building, one that might contain a spirit. Luckily, Afia knew exactly where to go because on the farm's grounds, there was an abandoned house that had once belonged to a groundskeeper. One night, months ago, while her mother and father were preparing dinner, Afia had heard her parents speaking about the house, the strange feeling it had, the way shadows seemed to move behind the empty windows sometimes. And then finally, how the groundskeeper had died there. Murdered over 50 years ago in a robbery gone wrong long before Afia's family bought it. They said his body had lain there for 3 days before it was discovered, covered in flies and dry as a husk because his wounds were so terrible. All his blood had poured out of him, covering the building's floor like a rich velvet blanket. If Afia's parents had known she'd been listening at the door, they would have been mad for months, years. But Afia was nothing if not sneaky, and she never got scared. The girls approached the house, Amma, the quietest, carrying an oil lantern to be used as their light source in the game. Afia had a flair for the dramatic, and lucky they took it because the moon, though full, had been swallowed up by thick, billowing clouds that spelled a storm was approaching. Afia pushed her shoulder against the rotten wooden door, and it jerked open noisily with a sound like a dog squealing. The first uneasy rumblings rippled through the group. But Afia was unbothered. "Come on, don't be chickens," she said and marched in. The other girls trailed behind her and jumped when Afia reached behind them to shove the door closed. The house seemed ordinary, like nothing bad had happened there at all. It was empty of furniture except a chair in the middle of the room and a single curtain still fixed to one of the windows. It blew in the breeze into the room, then sucked back against the window frame, in and out again, like breathing. "Okay, let's get started. Does everybody remember the signs?" The girls nodded. They each remembered their special signal to show they were still present when none of them could see or speak during the game. A knock, a clap, a tut, or a foot stomp. Afia placed the lantern on the chair in the middle of the room and immediately turned it off. The room sunk into blackness. Each of the girls said their name loudly 3 times. Then they made their way to their respective corners. They didn't need to discuss who the leader was. Clearly it was Afia. With each girl facing a corner, Afia began to count. 1, 2. In the distance, thunder thudded, then rumbled toward them. All the cicadas outside went quiet. 3. As disciplined as any army, the girls marched clockwise to their next corner and faced the wall there. To check if the ritual had worked, Afia began their prearranged check-in. She knocked on the wall. From the corner across from her, a clap, then a tut. Then they waited. Outside, there was the pat of the first fat raindrops. There was no sound of a foot stomping. There was the clap, then the tut, no stomp. What the hell? Afia was furious. Why wasn't Amma taking the game seriously? She wanted to turn around and yell, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" But then she would be breaking the rules. So instead, she pulled in a breath and counted to 3 again, hoping that by the time they made it to their new corners, Amma would have learned some sense. 1, 2, 3. Again, the girls moved in a clockwise direction, but the steps were more uncertain this time. Afia puffed hot air through her nose. Another clap of thunder sounded closer. This time she knocked on the wall. Then there was the clap. Then nothing. Now she was really mad. Had the others discussed some plan before they met without her? Some way to play a trick on her? Nobody could scare Afia. 1, 2, 3! Afia screamed, some of her spit flying loose and hitting the wall in front of her. She marched toward the next corner, wrenched her arm up, and knocked. There was nothing. No clap, no tut, no stomp of the feet. She knocked again and again. She drew back her fist and knocked so hard she thought she'd broken the wall down. But no, it was the thunder. It was even closer now. The room felt heavy, the air thick like the storm was right above her. Enraged by now, Afia spun around, pigtails flying, and in the middle of the room there was a shape. Dark, tall, a man. There wasn't enough light but faintly. With the moonlight and lightning dancing as the curtain moved in the window, the sclera of his eyes gleamed pink over red over white. At first, Afia thought he might be wearing a strange hat. His head was so odd, but as the faint light danced across him, it was clear he wasn't wearing a hat at all. No, half of his head was caved in, like he had been hit with a heavy bat. He sat on the chair perfectly still. In one hand, he held the unlit lamp, and in the other, the sparkling bracelet of Amma, the phone charm of Nana, and the hair tie of Esther. Afia couldn't breathe. She couldn't speak. Her mouth flapped fish-like as she tried to understand what she was seeing. Where were her friends? She almost called out for them, but she clapped her hand to her mouth, remembering that she wasn't allowed to speak normally until the game was over. She tried to remember what the game said to do. Was it to say her name 3 times, then walk, or walk and then say her name? Was she supposed to shout or whisper? Was it clockwise or counterclockwise? How was she supposed to turn on the lamp when it was in the man's hand? But what do we know about Afia? She was brave and bold. And as we've learned, maybe self-preservation wasn't high on her list of priorities. So she did the best she could, walking backwards, counterclockwise, first to one corner, then the other, retracing the steps that brought her to where she was, the last girl standing, and at the same time saying her name backwards 3 times. When she reached her original corner, she faced into the room again, and with the biggest breath she could take, and a feeling she was about to vomit, she darted forward, tore the lamp from the man's hand, and violently turned it on. A flash of lightning lit up the room at the same time the lamp came on, and blinded for a moment, Afia fell to the floor, and when she looked up, the man was gone. Her friends were back, each in their corner, and the oil lantern still sputtering fire everywhere. They had these horrible blank expressions on their faces, sheep-like expressions, like all they could think of was fear. With the next crash of thunder, the girls screamed and ran for the door, almost leaving Afia behind. Only Amma, in the last seconds, turned back to call for Afia, who stared at the fire, then the chair, in disbelief. But Amma's voice broke her out of it, and she scrabbled to her feet and made it out the door right as the flames began to lick at that single tattered curtain. The house burned down, and it was only the heavy rain that stopped the fire from spreading across the crops and other buildings. It could have destroyed the whole farm. Afia tried to say sorry. She really did. But, for proud people, sometimes this is really the hardest word to say. She said the closest thing she could to her friends. I didn't mean it. And she could have cried with relief that she didn't lose them that night. She wanted them to know how glad she was that they were okay. But that word sorry she couldn't say. So she did lose them. But she lost them. None of them were ever the same again. They didn't share what happened when they disappeared. It seemed like they didn't even remember. There was still that look in their eyes like prey animals. And whatever light they'd seen in Afia had gone out, vanished, just like they had during the game. The group fell apart and Afia never played with them anymore. At school, they passed without a word, as if Afia herself was a ghost. I heard the superstition chatting to someone from Ghana years ago at my old job that you should never leave an empty stool the right way up. You try to tilt it so a spirit doesn't sit there. Is this something any of you have heard of before? And do you know what the spirit might have been that night? Did it belong to the groundskeeper, or could it have been something else? I would love to know. So please drop your thoughts in the comments. Also, if you have something similar where you are, there are so many of these games, right? And I think whatever their power or their danger, they are a good illustration for life. It's good to experiment, to explore, to be adventurous, but also anything new or strange comes with a certain risk. So I guess it might be about finding balance, thrill seeking when the time is right, but also respecting certain things and not tempting fate. What do you think? If I think about Afia and her role as the leader of the group, I think this might also be a story about responsibility.
Yeah.
A responsibility to custom, but also to each other. Although her friendship with Amma and the others ended, they were still there for each other when it really counted. But maybe some wounds just can't heal, and we will never know what the other girls saw that night. Could it also be that Afia's story is an allegory for something else? Is there a reason why this game involves people being picked off while their friends aren't looking? I know one thing. Again and again, us humans find new ways to terrify ourselves. This time, it's a game of four corners. But there will be more rituals, more urban myths and creepy pastas and wild trends where things go wrong. And maybe we need both kinds of people. The ones who are bold and try things, and the ones who are more cautious. So where do you stand? Are you a trier or a denier? You can let me know. And be careful out there if you're a trier. See you next time, I hope.